Did Hela really destroy Mjolnir?
Darling, you have no idea what's possible.
Sure, we saw her destroy it, but if that's the case, then just what the heck is going to turn Jane Foster in the God of Thunder in the upcoming Thor 4? A while back, it was announced that Natalie Portman would be returning to the MCU in the upcoming Taika Waititi-directed Thor: Love and Thunder, specifically as the new God of Thunder.
Oh my God.
This story is an adaptation of similar comics plot, where Jane was given Mjolnir to become Thor. So how will this work in the MCU if the hammer was destroyed by Hela? Some theorize the hammer was a fake, and that the real one will be presented to Jane by none other than a time-traveling Captain America. Is there any merit to this wild theory? Let's find out! At 2019 San Diego Comic-Con, Disney and Marvel announced the fourth Thor film of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Thor: Love and Thunder. Another Taika Waititi joint. This film is set to release in 2022, and will bring Natalie Portman back into the Thor story as Jane Foster. Specifically, she's going to be coming back as the new Thor. This plot point is based on writer Jason Aaron and artist Russell Dodderman's 2014 run with the Thor comic, wherein they, you guessed it, gave Jane Foster Mjolnir and turned her into the latest God of Thunder. If this is the basis of the upcoming film, how exactly will Jane Foster become Thor? Since, as we all know, Hela destroyed Mjolnir in Thor Ragnarok. It can't be that Thor's gonna give her Stormbreaker since A, Natalie Portman was handed a ceremonial Mjolnir during the 2019 Comic-Con panel for the MCU, and B, Stormbreaker isn't as tied to Thor's power as Mjolnir was, the former being formed to channel Thor's power after he learned that they were his to command. So how will this work? Will there be a new hammer forged just for Jane Foster? Maybe. That seems like the most likely solution, but not everything goes the likely route when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is where this theory comes in. Originally presented on Reddit by user The Mediocre Critic, this theory states that the hammer that Hela destroyed was a fake Mjolnir that Captain America put in place of the real one so he could give the actual Mjolnir to Jane Foster when she would be needed the most as the new Thor. If this were the case, it would explain a lot. For one thing, it would give the MCU exactly the setup it needs to give Jane Foster Mjolnir, and second, it would sort of make sense for Cap to pull the old switcheroo for the sake of the greater good, since making a decision like that would fall in line with him dropping his superhero duties to retire. Namely, it would give the world one more way of protecting itself. Regardless of this, the theory might also allow for there to be two Thors in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Thor Odin's son with his own power channeled into Stormbreaker, and Jane Foster as Thor, with her powers coming from the time-displaced Mjolnir. This theory has some holes, obviously, but there are explanations for some of them, and regardless, that's the fun part about theories, right? Just seeing where the rope leads, even if it's not really attached to anything. So let's dive deeper into this theory and see if there's any merit to the idea of Captain America placing a fake Mjolnir in his time-traveling escapades at the end of Avengers Endgame. How exactly would the events play out if it is indeed true that Jane Foster has the original real-deal Mjolnir, and the one Hela destroyed was a fake? Let's go through this theory from beginning to end. First off, we all remember that in Avengers Endgame, Thor borrowed Mjolnir from the past, specifically during the events of Thor: The Dark World, so that he could have double the weapons in the upcoming final fight of the film. This ended up being more useful than Thor realized, since Captain America was able to wield Mjolnir at the perfect time to kick Thanos' butt with the power of a thunder god, resulting in easily one of the greatest moments in the entirety of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, once the fight was over, Cap had to return the hammer alongside the Infinity Stones back to the times they were taken from, all which was done in order to keep the timeline from destroying itself, which would have been very, very, very bad. So Cap returns the stones, returns the hammer, and then retires to life with Peggy Carter in his original time period. Or does he? Well, yes, he does retire with Peggy. That part definitely happened. But what about the fate of Mjolnir? Think about it this way. While Cap is sure that he's leaving the world in good hands with the heroes and Avengers still around after Iron Man's death and his retirement, he's not one to go without a backup plan, so he decides to pull a bit of a trick on the God of Thunder. Specifically, Cap gets the help of a magical expert to create a fake Mjolnir to replace the one he's supposed to place back in its time, so he can keep the other one and hand it off to whomever he deems should become either the next Thor or a second Thor.
Yes, of course, the people of Earth love me. I'm very popular.
In this case, Jane Foster. As for the magical expert, this theory doesn't exactly say who would help Cap to make a fake Mjolnir, but since it does suggest that he switches the hammers when Thor is meeting with Doctor Strange during Thor Ragnarok, it could also be implied that Doctor Strange is the one who creates the fake Mjolnir and helps Cap pull off this switch. Why Doctor Strange? Because at this point in time, he's still in possession of the Time Stone. Thus, he's the perfect person to understand Cap's larger plans for the timeline and ensure the safety of the future, and by extension, help him with his plans. So here's how it goes down so far. Cap goes back in time to return the stones, bringing Mjolnir with him. He returns the stones and then drops by Doctor Strange's sanctum before or around the time of Thor Ragnarok to tell him about his plan and ask for his help in two ways. One, to make a fake Mjolnir by some magical means, and two, to make sure Thor takes that fake Mjolnir when he recovers his hammer before leaving the sanctum in his visit during Ragnarok. And Doctor Strange, being able to understand the timeline and his outcome due to the Time Stone, agrees to do so. So Cap gets a fake hammer. Ensure Thor grabs that one and brings the real one with him to either present day or to a point in the future where Jane Foster is in need of Mjolnir and the power of Thor, or when the world is in need of her as a new or possibly second Thor. So Jane Foster receives Mjolnir and the power of Thor, and thus the plot of Love and Thunder is set up perfectly. Yes! Well, sort of. We'll be the first to admit that this theory has some holes in it. Holes that both the original Reddit poster and their many replies were quick to address. But that doesn't stop this theory completely in its tracks. Not only were we able to come up with some decent way to fill these plot holes, but like we established earlier, sometimes it's just fun to imagine how a fictional world would be if one of these crazy fan theories was true. So with that said, let's dive deeper into the holes of this theory and how to potentially solve them. The first major hole in this theory is that Thor would not be able to use the hammer as he normally does if it was not the real Mjolnir. And to this we say, what is he, God of Hammers? The answer is no, and we learned as much in Thor Ragnarok when Thor believed he was powerless against Hela without his hammer, which he learned was not true, and that Mjolnir was merely a super strong way for him to channel his power. Meaning as long as Thor believed that his Mjolnir was the real one, it would have served his purpose exactly as intended. Additionally, it explains two things about the scene where Hela destroys the hammer. One, it falls apart so easily because it's fake, and two, it's not enough to be a threat to Hela because it is a fake. But this in itself raises another question and hole in this theory. Wouldn't Hela have known that this was a fake hammer? In Thor Ragnarok, she helps to explain a separate plot hole that had been caused by the existence of an Infinity Gauntlet separate to Thanos' inside Odin's vault of weapons and treasure. Specifically, she knocks over the prop and calls it a fake, revealing that it was merely a trophy of some kind, perhaps a means of dissuading Thanos from seeking out a real Infinity Gauntlet? Who's to say? Regardless, this tells us that Hela knows a fake Odin treasure from a real one. So she would know that the Mjolnir that Thor throws at her was a fake, and our answer to this plot hole is yes. We'll explain. See, it really doesn't matter if Thor threw a fake hammer at Hela, she would have destroyed it either way. Heck, it might be the only reason why she destroyed it in the first place, as well as why she was able to destroy it so easily. Hela really doesn't give the hammer, fake or not, a second thought, so whether or not it was indeed a fake is pretty much irrelevant. This brings us to the final plot hole in this theory. If Mjolnir is indeed just a channeler for Thor's power, and that his lightning powers, strength, flight, and every other thunder god power are all a part of him, then what good does the hammer do exactly to give to Jane Foster? Well, it might not be to physically transform her into Thor like in the comics, but in the MCU canon, it was clear that when Cap wielded Mjolnir, he got an extra boost of power. It's just not clear how much power Cap gets from using the hammer, but it definitely makes him stronger than he was before. Meaning, if Cap gave this version of the hammer, the one not tied to Thor's power like it was in the first film after he was deemed unworthy, it would still give her some form of power. Furthermore, this is a superhero universe. There might also be some quick fix explanation that tells us why and how Jane Foster gets all the powers of Thor from this specific iteration of Mjolnir. But of course, as mentioned, we're not here to say whether or not this theory is true, or it could be how the MCU is going to unfold the saga of Jane Foster as Thor in Love and Thunder. We just wanted to dive down the rabbit hole a little bit to see how an MCU with the events of this theory in place might play out. This theory has a lot going for it, and though it might not be specifically how things go down, it's definitely a fun option. Either way, we're just excited to see Natalie Portman as Thor. So what do you think? Is this theory possible, or is it too far-fetched? Could Cap have pulled a time-traveling switcheroo in order to give Jane Foster Mjolnir? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more MCU theories just like this one.